welcome. Thank you so much for joining me here on Carren's Couch. Now today I've got somebody that's very, very, very special to me, who he doesn't even know that I've been stalking him and been a fan of his for so long. But about, it would have been about 3 years ago now, I came across a book. And it was a book that really spoke to me. You know, sometimes you can walk into bookshops and you're waiting for something to jump out and grab you and say, read me, read me. And I was doing exactly the same thing. I was down at Byron Bay and I was at a place called the Crystal Castle. And I really went in there looking for inspiration. I was looking for the message. I was looking for the sign. You know, I was at a transition point in my life, and also with my diet specifically. And I was finding that I didn't quite fit in with a lot of the philosophies that were around me at the time. And I found myself drawn to this book, and it was really quite amazing because I found myself drawn to this book. I picked it up, I flicked through it, I saw some things in there that just sounded like heaven to me, and then I put the book back down again because I thought, that's really thick and I don't know if I'm going to read it. So I put it back down, I walked out of the shop, and then I walked back in, picked up the book, and I came home with it because it was calling out my name. And that book is The World Peace Diet by Dr. Will Tuttle. So I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Will Tuttle. Thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Will Tuttle is here all the way over from the States doing a tour around Australia, is that right?
Yes, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand for about 6 weeks.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so whereabouts are you as far as the tour is concerned? Are you just at the beginning of it?
Just at the beginning of the Australia. The Taiwan tour was a huge success. We had over 2,000 people coming to my lectures there. It's a primarily Buddhist country, and they're really moving on veganism and compassion for animals. And a lot of the hospitals, they don't serve any meat at all because they know that contributes to a lot of the diseases. And then I gave a lecture in Perth a few days ago, and that was sold out. It went really well, and now we've just come over to the east side of Australia, and we're doing about 10 or 15, I guess, lectures here.
And how's that going for you with the eastern side? Because the eastern side, I guess, is where the greatest popularity is for Australia. So that I'm interested to hear how's Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and...
Well, we don't know yet. We're just going. Tonight will be the first one that I'll be doing here in Sunshine Coast. So I have a good feeling.
You're a sellout tonight?
I don't know. We'll see when we get there. I'm not sure.
So you don't get involved in all the logistics of it. You just
too much.
Turn up and do the inspiration.
Right.
I kind of like that style.
Yeah, I just got an email or a Facebook post right before I came over here from someone who said, I walked into your lecture in Perth as a meat eater, and I walked out as a much happier person. I'm now a vegan. So I was glad to read that. Yeah.
Do I call you Will? Do I call you Dr. Tuttle?
Yeah.
What would you prefer?
Yeah, either one is fine.
Either one is fine?
Yeah.
Just not late for lunch.
Right.
So fill everybody in on your philosophy. Why you decided to write the book, and really what are you all about? Because what I've understood from you, and I've read the book and I've listened to the audio of the book twice now, and what I've understood from you is that your philosophy is not just about not eating meat. Your philosophy is much grander than that, and it's not just about what you eat for the context of your diet. It's a much more holistic, harmonistic type of philosophy around the way that we exist on the planet. So tell everybody about where you've come from, why you have that view. What is your philosophy?
I was born and raised in a typical family eating the usual large amounts of meat, dairy products, and eggs in the northeastern part of the United States.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, back in the 1950s. And in fact, I remember when I was about 7, I said to my mother, I asked her, does everybody eat like we eat? And my mother said, yes, everybody eats like we eat. This is what everybody eats.
And you know, that's even an amazing question of its own.
Well, I just was wondering, you know, and then, but then she came back a few minutes later and she said, well, there are vegetarians. That event sticks out in my mind, even though it was, many years ago. And then she said, but I've never met one, and you'll never meet one either.
Oh,
there was this idea that vegetarians sort of don't really exist because where would they get their protein? It's kind of an impossibility to be a vegetarian. And my mother was totally right. I never heard of that word again. I never met anyone like that. I actually went away to summer camps in the summer and killed my own chickens and actually killed my own cow. I mean, with other people, we kind of did it together. And learned how to, where the food all comes from. And I didn't question it because I knew, I'd gone through such an intense indoctrination, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, that animals are put here by God for us to eat. They don't have a soul, they taste good, and if you don't eat them, you'll definitely die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency.
Welcome to the human race.
Right, exactly. So this is what I was taught. I think especially those of us born and raised in a Western culture were taught that. And so I didn't question it, but to make a long story short, I eventually left home after going to college. I ended up in a community that was eating a totally plant-based diet. This was in Tennessee. It was back in the age of hippie communes in the early 70s, and this was like the biggest one. And I saw about 900 people thriving on a completely plant-based diet. No meat, dairy, or eggs. About 200 of them were kids, vegan from birth. They were doing great.
Wow.
So when I found out, when I was there, just there for a few weeks, I think, but basically I saw this. I asked them why they're doing it. They told me about the fact that we're feeding most of the grain to animals while people are starving, to make dairy and eggs and the flesh of animals, and they wanted it as a community to try to reduce war and human hunger. And so eating low on the food chain is much more compassionate, not only to animals but to other human beings. And so I understood that. That made sense. And then the other thing was they just said how much suffering the animals go through.
That's an amazing philosophy that before I read your book, I had no idea existed in the world at large.
It's so important to understand that we're growing enough food right now to easily feed between 12 and 15 billion people. We only have a 7.4, 7.5 billion, and we have roughly 1 billion people starving because most of the grain that we're growing and most of the legumes that we're growing, all the corn, wheat, soy, and so forth, 80-90% of that's being fed to animals, so we can have dairy products and the flesh of animals of various kinds and eggs, while other people are starving because we in the wealthier countries raise the price of grain on the world market to feed to our animals while other people starve. So it's directly causing hunger and starvation. And these people understood that, and I understood it too. Wow. And then the other thing what he said was the animals that we are routinely eating are raised in stinking sheds where they never see the light of day, and they're mutilated in various ways. The wildlife around them is all killed, and they're eventually taken out and hung upside down and stabbed. And it was like I just looked through this lens, and I suddenly saw, almost like for the first time, this massive, terrible violence that we're committing routinely to millions of animals every day for food. And I saw it wasn't necessary because every day I was having meals with these people of vegetables and fruits and grains, and everybody was thriving, and I realized the food was delicious and you actually have more energy eating this way. And so that was it. I never ate meat again in my life since that day in 1975, which is about almost 40 years ago, 39 years ago.
Wow.
And a few years later, when I got to San Francisco, I found out about the suffering to dairy cows and to hens for eggs and for milk, and so I became a vegan in 1980, so that's 34 years. And I have actually, myself, been enormously blessed by this. My health has been terrific. I haven't actually even been to a doctor in 40 years, and have a huge amount of energy and do 150 to 200 events every year. I have never missed one in 25 years. So
wow.
And Madeline's the same way, and we've met a lot of people. I mean, basically people who eat a whole foods, organic, plant-based diet. Those are the big three. Plant-based number one, organic number two, and unprocessed or minimally processed. If we're eating that as a foundation of health, then statistically we have a much tinier risk of diabetes, osteoporosis, obesity, heart disease, cancer of various forms, liver disease, kidney disease, autoimmune disease, dementia. The whole, unfortunately, the actual huge number of diseases that people in the West are unfortunately plaguing us. And so really eating less protein, more healthy carbohydrates and vegetables and fruits, not only we find is really delicious, but what I talk about in the World Peace Diet is that it's the foundation of coming back to our inherent intelligence and compassion. So I think that's the important thing.
Well, tell us about that, because that's been one of the greatest challenges that I think I've faced since I've been vegan, and just recently I've gone raw vegan. One of the greatest challenges that I face through social media and through a lot of people who are in my circle of influence and socially, the biggest question that I get is, well, where do you get your protein? And don't you know that we've been eating meat since day one? It's in our DNA. We've been hunter-gatherers since caveman days. What are you thinking? That's just crazy. No one can exist that way. And for me personally, my experience has been the direct opposite. I've always, struggled with my weight. I've always had, stomach and digestive issues. And I put it down to what goes on up here affects what goes on in my body. And I'm the world's greatest animal lover. So to eat animals always upset me.
Yeah, I think it upsets everyone. No one. We have to be forced into it by our culture. And to learn to see animals as mere things. Certain animals, some animals like dogs and cats were taught to have compassion and care for, perhaps, and be part of the family. Other animals like cows and pigs and fishes and so forth we see as just meat, bacon, and beef. And
Right.
So we have to shut down our capacity to make connections, which is actually our intelligence. We have to reduce our intelligence as individuals and as a society. And when we reduce our intelligence and our compassion, then we can do what we're doing, which is basically destroying the oceans, destroying the rainforests, destroying our health, creating social institutions that are very competitive and violent, that concentrate most of the wealth in the hands of a tiny minority, that inflict huge amounts of disease and destruction on the environment and on other people, that force other people to do the work we don't want to have to do, to stab animals all day and mutilate them and harm them. And these poor people have the highest rates of suicide and drug addiction and alcoholism, because doing this kind of work brings out the worst in people. And then we take that violence and we actually feed it to our children, feed it to ourselves, and we wonder why we create a war where peace and justice and freedom and equality, people think, well, that'll never happen. It will never happen as long as we're committing such violence towards animals. But what the World Peace Diet talks about is that it is possible for us to create a world where peace and justice and freedom and sustainability and equality are possible. It requires us to have compassion for non-human animals, to not just use them because they can't retaliate, and respect them and respect their lives. And so what veganism is, I think, really, in a nutshell, it's coming back to our true home and learning to look when we see a being and see a being rather than just seeing a thing. And it's nothing to be proud of. It's not being better than anybody. It's just simply looking with eyes of radical inclusion. And I'm going to include all living beings within the sphere of my caring and my concern. And I think that's the foundation of real intelligence and sanity, and it's our true nature. We have to be divorced from our true nature. We have to have our intelligence suppressed by being forced to go through 3 times a day meals where we learn to look with eyes of reductionism and commodification and might makes right and exclusion and dominate what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as the sacred feminine. Because I think women in general, but also men, have within us a natural compassion and sensitivity, but when we're forced to eat animals, that gets repressed. And so I refer to this as Sophia in the World Peace Diet, this ability to love life and nurture life and protect life. And that's the source of real health. Real health comes when we have a healthy community, healthy world, healthy ecosystems, and psychological and spiritual and emotional health. And so when people say, oh no, we've been eating meat forever and we've been doing this forever, first of all, we don't know that. We don't even know what happened on 9/11. We don't know, for sure we don't know what happened, thousands of years ago in prehistory. But a lot of evidence now that anthropologists are becoming more women are anthropologists, more vegetarians and vegans are anthropologists, they're realizing that a lot of that is just pure hype. It's total wrong. It's just baloney that people ate meat and ate large quantities of meat and all of that. It's it's being disproven that the farther back you go, you find people eating plant-based diets, that the early humans ate totally plant-based diets. But whatever they did in the past doesn't matter in a sense. We should, instead of being driven by the past all the time, we should look to the future. Exactly. See, with the Paleo diet, they're always looking back over their shoulder, trying to be like some people behind them. I mean, they're sitting at computers, right? they're not saying I'm not going to use a computer because the cavemen didn't do that, or I'm not going to drive a car, or I'm not going to have proper sanitation and whatever. So I think the idea is to look to the future that we would like to create, to realize that there's no reason to stab and imprison animals. They do nothing but contribute saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and huge amounts of sewage, global warming, devastation, overfishing. It's a worst attack against the environment. We can thrive on plant-based diets. I've been doing it successfully, and millions of other people are doing it successfully. Everyone can, actually. Yeah. And look at the kind of future we want to create, and then move toward that. Let us be drawn to the future we'd like to live, rather than somehow being propelled by a past we don't even know ever even existed.
So I'm really fascinated by the link that you draw in the book about, and you made reference to this earlier, about how the way that we are with animals and the way that we treat our animals, we imprison them and we enslave them and stab them, and they live, a relatively tragic life, but then we go and eat that meat.
Right.
So I'm really fascinated by the link that you draw in the context of what we're eating is perpetuating the violence and the destruction and the war that exists in the world, because not only do we see that from nation to nation, but it's happening in relationships. It's happening between siblings. It's happening between friends, where there's aggression, or there's this this fight kind of mentality, and I see it a lot. Especially now with some of the new fitness regimes that are out, and it's all about eating lots and lots of meat, and I'm really curious as to how did you draw that link? How did you come up with that understanding that was actually linked?
Right. Well, I had the opportunity when I was just still in my late 20s. I had been interested in meditation from the time I was in my early 20s, and I started meditating a lot, just meditating, because what I realized is that all of us, like myself especially, I had been born into a culture, and my consciousness had been programmed by my cultural upbringing. And I had this yearning to grow and awaken spiritually, to not be psychologically enslaved to, like Krishnamurti has this great saying, it's not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that idea, so I felt like I had tried my whole life to be well-adjusted to society, to be well-liked, to get a good job, and all this, and I realized this is not healthy. And then I realized that there were other cultural traditions of meditation, great spiritual teachers and spiritual traditions, and the Buddhist tradition and Taoist tradition, and even some of the great Christian mystics. And it's a universal teaching that it's possible to elevate ourselves emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, ethically, and live a life instead of trying to get something and manipulate people and win and all this, which is really, I realized more and more, that's a pathway to misery, not only causing misery for others because I'm trying to manipulate them and sell them something they don't want or whatever, so I get what I want, but it's actually a pathway to misery to myself, that everything I do that harms others comes back, and everything I do that blesses others and encourages them and loves them and frees them also comes back.
Yeah.
And so I started meditating. I started living in meditation centers. I started spending 8, 10, 12 hours a day just sitting and quieting my mind and gradually extricating my consciousness out of the prison that I think all of us are put into. And eventually I ended up in Korea as a Zen monk. I shaved my head. I was sitting from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night.
What a journey.
Right, and there I was. And I realized when I was there in Korea, first of all, that I was in a community that had been practicing what we would call veganism for 700 years. Since the 1200s, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, nothing that would cause animal suffering. Even mosquitoes, we would try to just, take them out, not just kill them.
Yeah.
The idea was when you get sensitive to your own thoughts and feelings, then we begin to get sensitive to the violence that we're causing. And I realized I'd been raised in a society that was busy, that was hard, that was fast, that was about looking out for number one, myself, and we're just destroying ecosystems and animals and hungry people without even feeling it. We have armor on, we just go, and we don't want to know the ramifications of our actions, how the ripples that go out from our lives harm others. We don't realize that the ripples that go out will come back. I call it the boomerang effect. Whatever we put out comes back.
Yeah.
But they had understood this in this meditation center for centuries quieting the mind. And so that's why they were living this way. That I realized that veganism is an ancient spiritual wisdom tradition that goes back thousands and thousands of years. It's our true nature, that when we cause imprisonment and pain and suffering to others, we will end up in prison in pain and suffering ourselves. And so even though the pigs and cows and chickens and fishes don't retaliate, they don't rise up and do a class action lawsuit against us or come back and attack us. They just take it. You can cut them, you can mutilate them, you can eat their dairy products and eggs and all that. And they suffer terribly because we steal these things from them and steal their babies and steal their lives and steal their purposes. But our violence towards them always retaliates. But we live in a society that's so ethically and emotionally and really intellectually immature that we don't recognize it. We don't see it coming back as physical disease, psychological disease, cultural disease, as war and conflict. So through the meditation I did there, I was able to finally, in some ways, to extricate my mind out of that programming and realize that what I am and what you are and what all our listeners are, and really I think what all living beings are, essentially is infinite and eternal consciousness that was never born and will never die, that is pure and free and of the nature of love and kindness and celebration of life. That's our essential true nature. But we're born into a culture where we're taught, basically, unfortunately, to forget all that and compete with each other. And the system we're born into basically extricates most of the wealth and health out of the masses and into the hands of a tiny elite. And so, who own the big meat, dairy, egg, and pharmaceutical, military, medical complex, this huge, and so if we want to create a world of equality and freedom for all of us, for the people and for the animals and for our children and for the ecosystems, we have to question that, and the place to question it is our plate, because anthropologists understand that the main way any culture transmits its values is through the meals. These are the most intimate, powerful rituals we go through.
Well, it's
so
where we connect, isn't it? I mean, we sit down to the table together as a family with our friends, and it's always a very social interaction. You want to get together with somebody, let's go and have a coffee, or let's go and have something to eat together. It's food.
All over the world, every culture, it's food.
Yeah.
So that's why it's tough in many ways for people. They hear what we're saying, and they go, that's right. It's better for the earth, it's better for the animals, it's better for my health, it's better, better, better. And then you say, let's do it, let's go vegan. They go, well, what'll my husband think? Or what'll they think at work? And that's the biggest problem. People want to fit in. So what veganism is in many ways is just understanding this deeply enough that I'm willing to live it no matter what other people think, and then actually helping them. And I think it's the greatest gift we can give to others, is to live this, to thrive as vegans, and to spread this message, and it frees everyone. It really does.
I was actually going to ask you about that. What do you think is going to be your legacy? Because, is it, in my mind, a perfect world, and certainly what drives me is very much what you were talking about just a moment ago, about that eternal consciousness, in that the part of us that is with us when we wake up in the morning and with us when we go to sleep at night, and the rest of it's just the game that we play during the day to fill in the time. But I really have strong beliefs about our consciousness and awareness, and I do lots of study around transpersonal psychology. And I was listening to something the other day where society actually labels mysticism as psychosis because we don't understand mysticism yet. This is the thing that has me so enamored and curious, is because the scientist himself knows that he's aware, yet he can't measure it, therefore he says he's not. And I think that that's the real dichotomy that we live with in society, is that we know that there is an innate intelligence that beats our heart, breathes us, blooms a rose and bakes a baby. We know that innate intelligence exists within us, yet we live as if it doesn't.
And there's a reason for that. I think there's a certain materialism in our society. We have lived in probably the most materialistic culture in the history of the world, in the sense of thinking that matter is all that exists. And I talk in the World Peace Diet about how that is a natural result of a culture after 10,000 years. We've been herding animals, owning animals as property for food for about 8,000 or 10,000 years, and that has basically forced us to look to see beings as mere things, matter. We don't see a cow or a pig who as a being with a consciousness and awareness, who loves her babies and all that. We see her merely as a piece of meat. And once we see animals as a piece of meat, it's a small step to learning to see others as a piece of meat. I was taught as a little boy, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but when I was in the locker room, I was very athletic as a kid and played all these different sports. But in the locker rooms as a 10, 12, 13, 15, 18-year-old kid, I was being very much indoctrinated to see girls as just meat. Meat, the animals you use as meat to eat, the girls you use as meat for sexual pleasure, and then you start to see others as just meat, just as someone to dominate or control or to exploit or to get something from.
Yeah.
And so that's why we create a philosophy a science that nothing exists except what you can measure. But no other culture in the world, I don't think, has been that primitive. I mean, really, it's very primitive. It's absurd, really. And scientists have been able to say, well, we don't even know if animals have consciousness because we can't measure it. Well, how do you know anyone has consciousness? The consciousness is actually the foundation of all life.
Yeah.
And I think once we have any kind of intuitive awakening, we understand that. And I think that's the beauty, really, of what veganism is. It's essentially the resurrection of what I call, in the World Peace Diet, Sophia. Sophia is the real wisdom. Sophia meant wisdom.
Yeah.
In the ancient, it was the goddess of wisdom. And the word philosophy means the love of Sophia, the love of wisdom, the inner wisdom. And I think veganism is this resurrection of Sophia that we see happening in our society, where we're questioning what you're talking about, this scientific materialism and reductionism, reducing people, reducing ecosystems to just board feet of lumber, reducing the ocean to just how many fish can it give us, because that mentality, we destroy everything. We just not only destroy the natural world, we destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I think the great frontier for us, and the legacy, since you asked that, is if we can somehow awaken out of this hypnotic trance we've all been put into, and see the interconnectedness of all life, the sacredness of all life, and live that. And don't believe when people say, well, you need to eat animal flesh to get protein, or you need to eat dairy to get calcium, or you need to eat fish to get omega-3, or anything. All the nutrients we need come from plants. If there's any nutrient in an animal, it got there from a plant. All the amino acids, all the lipids, all the essential fatty acids, carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, everything essentially originates from plants and from nature. Animals do not contribute anything that we can't get directly. That's why I can be so happy and healthy after 30, whatever it is, 4 years as a vegan, and many other people go a lot longer. It's the greatest thing. My mother is a vegan, in her 80s. Madeline's mother, my wife, is in her 90s, and they're healthy. My mother doesn't take any pharmaceutical drugs of any kind, and all of her friends are taking it. We have my sister, my niece, her son, vegan from birth. We see this happening more and more. People are waking up and realizing that we shouldn't really go along with the food fads that are telling us that we need to not eat, that carbohydrates are bad, for example. Carbohydrates, especially complex carbohydrates, are the fuel our bodies are made to run on. There's no carbohydrates in any animal food. That's why these diets are so devastating, actually.
Yeah. Well, because there's a lot out there about the high-fat, low-carb. The high-fat, low-carb diet is really, it's very confusing, actually. It's very confusing for people who are really just keen to eat for health. But I think the thing that makes what you're talking about so magical is that it's not just about diet, it's about living in a world that's sustainable for all of us. And it's about making choices that are sustainable for everybody. And I love the way you talk about seeing animals as beings.
You have to. Yeah.
Because our culture is asleep. And I think we are asleep. And I think that we live in a void almost, because we are so disassociated from the innate intelligence in ourselves and the innate intelligence that exists in other beings, in terms of, the magic and the beautiful contribution that they make.
Right.
Tell me in closing, before we bring our session to an end, and I really don't want to, I want you to move and live in here with me.
Right.
There's big social challenges that affect people when they have lived in a family that is, eats meat and, does all the normal stuff, the leather shoes, the leather handbag, and I was that person too. So there's big challenges that face us when we decide perhaps, or even entertain or flirt with Just flirt with it. Just, just do it for a day and see how you go. But there's big challenges that we face socially in terms of our level of acceptance. And, I honestly believe that the basic human requirement is for love and acceptance. And when we find our social circles ostracize us because we don't fit anymore, that's a challenge. What would you say to the people who are listening and watching? What's a nugget of gold that you can give each of us for that?
Yeah, right. Thank you, Carren. I think the nugget of gold I would share really is that whatever the cost is in terms of social relationships that may seem in the moment to be giving up a lot is tiny compared to the enormous benefits that accrue over the long term. That when we move to a plant-based diet for ethical reasons, we're acting from the deeper wisdom in our own heart, and two things happen. Number one, we begin to become more harmonious, more deep feeling, and more compassionate in our relationships with others, which creates the foundation for more harmonious relationships in our own lives. And I've seen this a lot. People say they're so much more at peace, they're more connected to nature, to their own nature, now that they're vegans. And there's nothing more important than that. We can't really have harmonious relationships if we're not being honest and not being true to ourselves. And then the other thing is that if we go vegan and we do find ourselves being ostracized or being somehow criticized by other people who are maybe eating animal foods, who are suspicious of this, and in the World Peace Diet, I actually talk about this quite a bit to understand this more deeply, but by going vegan, we actually just plant seeds that help liberate them in some way. And so I think more and more we're finding, as more and more people are going vegan and the momentum is building, there are more vegan restaurants, there's more restaurants that serve vegan food, there's more awareness about veganism, so more and more people are going, oh, you're vegan, that's pretty cool, They're not saying, what's wrong with you, They're actually, it's becoming viewed more and more as acceptable, and the only way that's going to happen is if people come out of the closet, say, yeah, I'm a vegan, and it's the greatest thing, and as we do that, we create permission for people to come back home to their true nature, be compassionate to animals and to the earth and to each other and to their own selves, and not just be a robot programmed doing destruction and violence without living their own lives. Because eating meat and dairy, I'm not living my life. I'm living the life that I was programmed to live. That's a key point. Cows, for example, are eating huge amounts of meat now to fatten them up and make them give more milk. Fish meal and other type of meat are fed to cows. It's not because it's in the interest of the cows for them to eat all this meat. It's because it's in the interest of their exploiters that they eat a lot of meat. And anyone who's eating meat and dairy and eggs right now, it's not in your interest to eat meat and dairy and eggs. It's in the interest of your exploiters. That's why you're eating meat, dairy, and eggs, because it's good for the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media complex. You will be reliably sick and have diseases, and they'll get a lot of money out of you. So if you don't want to just be exploited and be a slave, then go vegan and be free and give freedom to others, that's how we get to be free.
Do you really believe that that's true? And this is just a question that's plagued me that I can't seem to reconcile, and I don't know if anybody else has got the same question, but I can't reconcile that humans would deliberately want to keep people enslaved and entrapped in that meat medical model where they have to go and get medication, therefore keep feeding them meat, keep feeding them milk, keep making them eat eggs, keep doing it because we know it makes them sick. Are we really doing that to each other? I mean, is that really real? And is it are we doing it on purpose? Is it deliberate? Or are we just in a society that is so disassociated from itself that we can't see anything else? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question.
Because innately we're good. People are good innately. I don't believe that anybody wakes up in the morning and says, "How can I be a frecklehead today? Like, how can I ruin the world today?" So are we that disassociated? I mean, what?
Well, briefly, the average person is just following orders. They're eating meat and dairy and eggs because they're following orders that they got from the time they're little infants. The doctors are also saying, you're a vegan, no, that's not good, you better eat a little meat or you're not going to be healthy. They're just following orders. They don't know anything about nutrition.
Right.
The whole industry, all the industries, the drug salesmen, they're just following orders. They're told, look, give this drug because it's good for that. There's a whole massive industries that are in place, if I mean, I know doctors who understood that if they told their patients that they will be much more healthy if they don't eat meat, and they started doing that, that the hospital administrator said, if you do that anymore, you're out of here. And the hospital administrators will not stand for doctors that actually get rid of heart and cancer operations. So that's the source of the money for all these things. They're not going to stand for that. Money is behind everything. Animals bring money, disease brings money, war brings money, and environmental devastation all bring money to a tiny wealthy elite. And we, the people, have to understand that and not cooperate with that and create a world that we want to live in, not that just creates us as slaves for a wealthy elite.
Yeah, it's an amazing point of view, and I have to wrap it up, but I so don't want to. I so don't want to. This is such an amazing conversation that we could go on for hours and go down lots of different rabbit holes. Yeah. But I think the best thing that you could do, if you're even curious about this, and what I actually want to ask you to do for everybody that's watching and everybody that's listening on the podcast as well, what I want to ask you to do is, whether you agree with myself and Dr. Tuttle, whether you agree with us or you don't agree with us, do the research. Go and check it out, because the transformation begins with questioning. And if you are questioning anything, it's time to start to do the research for yourself. Now, I also want to say that it doesn't matter what we believe, you can always find information that will back your point of view. Do you agree?
I really do agree. Yeah, you always can, but you said it perfectly. Just do the research and with an open mind and with a yearning, I think, to become free of the program.
Oh, it's lovely. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have watched The Matrix, but it all sounds very much similar. Like The Matrix. Right. Go ahead, do yourselves a favour. You'll see my book here. I've got all the little tabs and I've highlighted all the way through it. It's like a Bible for me. You can also get the book on audible.com, where you can download an Audible copy, where you can listen to it on your MP3 while you're out jogging, running, walking, doing whatever it is that you do. So it's the World Peace Diet. Again, do the research, have a read through it, and it's going to answer so many questions for you. And even if you don't agree, do the research. And if you do agree, I'm going to see you on the ride. Thank you so much, Dr. Tuttle, for joining us. It's been an absolute treat to have you, and I would so love to have you back on the couch next time you're in Australia, or next time I'm in the States, I'm coming to your place.
Great.
So thank you so much for joining us here on Carren's Couch. It's been an absolute honour to share somebody who, as I said, has been somebody who's been so close to my heart and a hero of mine, and I really want to be you when I grow up. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week on Carren's Couch. Enjoy and go on the ride. See you soon. Bye.